All right. Well, I'm going to transition here. Thank you, Chris, again for talking about Georgia in terms of foot traffic and the different sectors. I'm actually going to switch now to introduce Leiden Faust from Spatial AI. Leiden, are you jumping on?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great. Thanks for joining us today. Let me do a little introduction about Leiden. Leiden is the co-founder of Spatial AI, the creator of Geosocial data, a Techstars company. Before Spatial, Leiden was an ethnographic research consultant for brands like P&G, J&J, Intel, and an adjunct professor of ethnography at Miami University. Very impressive. So thank you so much, Leiden, for being here today. I'm also very excited to announce that Uber Media is entering a partnership with Spatial AI. And that's partly why we're having you on today, because you've been able to do some really enhancements to mobile location data with social sentiment data. So to assist in their efforts of studying the impact of COVID-19, we provided them with a distance travel from home data set to study social sentiment data. So Leiden, I'm going to throw it to you to talk about what you've been able to find here.
Cool. Thanks, Evelina. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background on Geosocial. Some of you in the webinar might not know about it. And then I'll go into the correlation analysis that we did with the distance travel from home metric that we got. But ultimately, what Geosocial does for the mobile movement data is it tells you who is the types of people that are behind the devices and their interests. So stepping back, the insight that sparked Geosocial data is that there's billions of people talking about their mindsets, interests, and attitudes on social media. There was no company that was capturing that information at a geographic level. So that's what we do. We pull from data sources like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Flickr, Foursquare, event data to understand that location, the types of people there, and what they're doing. So it's a study of people by what they do. We organize all of those posts into 72 different geosocial segments using a clustering algorithm, which I'll get into just in a second, so that we can see across every block group in the United States, are people foodies? Are they into fitness? Are they into yoga, fashion, or hip hop? And ultimately, what that creates is a vivid picture of a community. And then attaching that to the devices that come from that community give you also the vivid picture of those people. So yeah, I would really consider the movement data and geosocial data as sister data sets, just in the way that we used to define trade areas as 1, 3, 5 mile radiuses, or we'd have to do a ton of surveys to understand what a trade area was. We don't have to do that anymore. We can actually see the people visiting the store. In the same way, we used to have to do tons of surveys to understand who is our customer. We don't have to do that anymore because customers are indicating what they're doing and what they're interested in all the time on social media, or using the same core technology as a cell phone. Okay, so methodology. So we took our 72 different geosocial segments and we correlated against the Uber Media distance metric, and we analyzed and ranked those geosocial segments. So what we're really trying to discover is the types of interests people have, or the types of attitudes they have, does that have any indication on if they're going to be compliant with stay-at-home orders or not? And what we found here was fascinating, to say the least. And so how we expressed it here, you can see a little graph. So who are the best and the worst at following the stay-at-home orders? So we expressed that in a percentage. So negative means they were less likely to follow stay-at-home orders and they traveled more. And then positive is mean they're more likely to follow stay-at-home orders and travel less. Okay, so we're going to look first at the people that followed stay-at-home orders well. So what we did here is we looked at the dominant geosocial segments in a block group. So if yoga advocates was really high in a block group, we labeled that block group a yoga advocate block group. So we can see the best people at following stay-at-home orders are yoga advocates, followed by outdoor adventures. You have a few other geosocial segments here: organized sports, farm culture, happily ever after, competitive nature. And we'll get into these in a little bit more depth and really try to understand why exactly that was working. So now let's look at the people that did not follow stay-at-home orders very well. A new picture begins to emerge. So you can see the bottom: hip hop culture, smoke culture, party life. These people were not particularly good at following stay-at-home orders. And just as you stand back overall, I think an interesting insight: if you come from a block group that scores highly for yoga advocates, you're about 17% more likely to follow stay-at-home orders than a block group that was dominant for hip hop culture, just purely based on the behaviors that are going on around you. So let's see if we can make sense of why some of these people follow stay-at-home orders and what were the common threads here. Okay, so we can see here a first hypothesis. And from a policy and analytics perspective, it's really important to understand these common threads and what exactly hold us together. So a few hypotheses, as we know the social segments, are maybe this has to do with older population. And this is sort of true overall. So farm culture, praise and worship match that description in this set. But there's things like organized sports, competitive nature, and lighthearted fun that really buck that trend. So it isn't exactly just older population that are better at following the stay-at-home orders. Another hypothesis is that these segments represent higher income areas. So overall, again, that's somewhat true. But there's some surprising ones here that don't necessarily follow that. LGBTQ culture, wine lovers, and wealth signaling are some of our highest income segments, and they don't show up anywhere here. Whereas we have praise and worship, which in the Georgia area isn't necessarily correlated with high income. So there's something more to the story going on. One thing that is clear: in a different study, we ran these geosocial segments against health outcome variables at emergency centers and hospitals. And all of these segments have a correlation with people not having adverse health outcomes and going to emergency centers less. It's good to know, but we still don't exactly know why these people are better at following the stay-at-home orders. So I think we can find that if we look at this in contrast and see what is true about the people that did not follow stay-at-home orders or are less afraid of going out.
Yeah, Lyden, before we jump to that next slide, we actually do have a question from the audience. Can you explain what the percent difference is in terms of like, what is it compared to? What's the difference to?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So it's the percent difference traveled. So we took the average block group, and so yoga advocates were 5%. So block groups that were high in yoga advocates traveled 5% less than the average. Hip hop culture traveled 12% more than the average.
Got it. Well, let's look at,
question.
Yeah, and let's look at that hip hop culture.
Cool. Okay, so maybe kind of as you step back and you look at some of these, some of them make a whole lot of sense. So we see hip hop culture, smoke culture, party life, live experiences. If you live in block groups that are historically known or dominant for this type of behavior, you are considerably less likely to follow stay-at-home orders. So this kind of creates a picture for us. So we can look at some of the hypothesis here is that maybe these people are younger, and so they're just less afraid of going out. Again, that's overall true, but missing from this is our two youngest segments, which is bookish and student life. So again, there's a health theme here. All of these variables have some sort of correlation with actually adverse health outcomes in emergency centers and hospitals, and going to emergency centers and hospitals more often. So that's interesting, but it also, again, doesn't exactly explain why. There is one segment that to us sticks out like a sore thumb from all of these other segments, and that is family time, for obvious reasons, and they're also a little bit higher income. So let's actually, I always love it when something sticks out as bizarre, and then you can really dig into that. So let's dig into family life to see if we can understand why exactly those people didn't follow stay-at-home orders. So here's a look at our family time segment. Just real quick on how our segments are built. They're purely built of the texts that are coming out of the area. We use a machine clustering algorithm. So the machine found a mathematical relationship between family time, s'mores, family birthdays, squad goals, family first, in-laws, and making memories and gratitude. So, as a machine, doesn't know exactly why it came up with that cluster, but as humans, we clearly know that these are people expressing family time and having fun with family. So I just want to point you guys really quickly to one of these 15. There's thousands of words that make up this document here, but in-laws is what I want to point you to. So I don't know if you guys have kind of just checked this out, but people are visiting their in-laws. And the family birthday is another one. How many people have seen family birthdays on front porches rather than inside recently? I just find this fascinating that these people desire social connection with their family, and that is driving them to essentially break stay-at-home orders, which is really fascinating to me. And really, that's a clue as to what are the commonalities that hold all of these segments together.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Lyden, because actually yesterday was my aunt's birthday, and I did go over to say happy birthday. We sang happy birthday outside of the house, social, like being 6 feet apart. But I rarely leave the house, and for that, it was important for me to be there and say happy birthday.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, humans there's common things among humans across the U.S. And I think that's why Georgia's so interesting, because it's a bellwether, and the patterns that we see here, we might also see them across the U.S. So ultimately, the thread that holds these together is that effective social distancers have the unique capability of finding fulfillment internally. Think about yoga advocates. Think about praise and worship. These all are patterns where people can find their own fulfillment internally, whereas we look at it in contrast, ineffective social distancers are people that travel more, come from a place where historically social connection is very important, and they essentially have a missing piece of their life. For example, party life, hip hop culture, family time also follows those patterns. So demographically, there are some patterns, but the true thing holding this together is people desiring social connection versus people finding their fulfillment internally. So really interesting ethnographic insight. That would have taken months of surveys and interviews, and by the time we would have done that, it would have been all over anyways. The implications are very interesting for this as well. So I have a few implications written out, but I also noticed some of the sectors that you guys came from. So I'm going to spitball a few of them. So for policymakers, first of all, here we have using the combination of mobile data and social media data, an exhaustive list of behaviors within a city to encourage or discourage to make a city more resilient. Obviously, as we come out of stay-at-home orders, we want to come out of it slowly. It isn't like and we're already seeing people doing this. So there's some things that we can really encourage to be smart about that. I know there's a lot of stay-at-home yoga programs that are going on, especially for impoverished communities. I think we should absolutely encourage those as cities, as well as outdoor adventures. Like, encourage people to go visit your city and see some of those more outdoors sights to see versus going into the center of the city where they might be closer to people. So we have an exhaustive list. This list is essentially a brainstorming list. What types of things do you have in your city that you can encourage or discourage when it comes to tourism, when it comes to policy? Another social implication here is this really works as a magnifying glass. So using the social distancing metric, you can see which communities aren't particularly good at social distancing, but there's very different reasons why they might not be good at social distancing. I didn't mention the deep emotions and heartfelt sharing as they were not very good at social distancing. These are essentially depressive segments. These are people really talking about problems in their life, relationship problems. And so when you see an area that is not socially distancing very well, And you see one of the reasons is because there's a lot of deep emotions or depressive activity in that area. You would want to speak to that area very, very sensitively versus an area that is not socially distancing because of family time. They're visiting their family. There's very different reasons. There's a why behind why people are moving and why they're not moving. And so that's something that we can kind of consider as we're making our policies and making our marketing to reach those people. A few other things that I thought of as I looked at the folks that have joined the webinar. For tourism, I might actually consider looking at the inverse. So which people are not particularly afraid to get out? I might actually look at the people that aren't social distancing or are moving more. They're already indicating that they may be feeling a little bit less fear to get out. So I might consider that cohort of people. I saw there's an agency that is working for an amusement park here. I would also be looking around that the locations of the amusement park to see what are the block groups where people are getting out there and moving. And I would focus on advertising to those block groups, the opening, before I would advertise to the folks that are not getting out and moving. And you have a list of the types of people that are in those block groups and how to reach them. So that's an opportunity as well.
Great, and Lyda, I want to mention that somebody in the Q&A also mentioned it's not in terms of family time. They think it's not only because I have to go visit family, but also my kids are driving me nuts. And we need to get out and like go for a walk or head out to somewhere else that they can play besides inside the house.
That's cool. This is kind of an interesting anecdote as we've seen our data move. Our data generally stays pretty stable in areas, but there's a metropolitan and then in sort of like a suburban divide in our data. And you can see in urban areas, the segment that is risen the most of all of our segments because of COVID is animal lovers and dog lovers. So people in urban areas are spending much more time and thinking a lot more about their dogs. There's only few people in the department to connect with. Now, on the other hand, related to the family thing, we have now seen in suburban areas, people are really turning towards their families and talking about their families more. Now, we don't know the sentiment. All we know is that they're talking about their families more. So it could be in a negative way or it could be in a positive way. And I certainly see that out here. There's a ton of families that get out and walk. So thanks for making that comment. I think that is absolutely true.
And there are probably a lot more Instagram videos of my dogs than there was before, or before all of this. He's hanging out with me. She's hanging out with me. So. Well, Lyden, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar and giving us some insight into what social sentiment data can do and how it can be paired with mobile location data to gain more insight into who, right? The who is who's in the area. These new areas that, for example, that Sonic might be able to market to. Like what does that customer behavior or makeup look like? What are they talking about? What appeals to them? This could be data that can give insights into that. Thank you.